Good evening, everybody, and welcome. It's delightful to be here once again at the Northern Atheists. And yes, my name's David Milne, and I've been invited to give a talk this evening. A rather long-winded title, I have to be honest with you. Social Justice, Pandemics and Reality, Why Science, Rational Thought and Understanding the Illusion of Free Will is Vital for Human Survival into the 21st Century and Beyond. It's a bit of a mouthful. I do apologise. The reason was that about a year ago, I was asked to do a general talk to a sixth form college. And within the RE syllabus. And I thought, well, how to kind of bring the whole world together in a long title. So I don't think I necessarily succeeded in that, but that's okay. You know, if you can hang on to that for a moment, that'll be fine. So I think so. As you can see, there's bits of viruses and things. So I want the audience here to pretend that you're actually sixth formers with three things in mind. One is food. The other one is sex, and the third one is wondering whether the old chap at the front will stop talking soon in order that you can engage in the first two. You all remember being sixth formers, I'm sure you do. Okay, so here we go. So humanism. I'm going to start this evening with a brief introduction on humanism per se. So humanism is a non-religious, liberal, secular worldview based upon science, rational thought and evidence. We're all here by chance, and I'm sure you've worked that out for yourselves. How did your mum and dad first meet? Now, there's an interesting thing. Were they on holiday? Did they bump into each other in the street? And what's it all for? What's his life for? What are we doing here? Jim Al-Khalili, who is one of our patrons at Humanist UK, rejoice in that brief yet wondrous coming together of 10,000 trillion atoms. That's you and you and you and you and everybody else in the room here, which have conspired through the laws of physics and chance to make you. I'm extremely pleased that my parents had sex, but we won't delve into that too deeply this evening. Humanism. There's no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy life. And humanists and people who are thinking will say something along the lines, there is no evidence for the supernatural, therefore gods do not exist. And our ancient primitive ancestors created stories, obviously, to try to understand what they saw. So earthquakes, lightning, tsunamis, floods, volcanic eruptions, eclipses, exploding stars, deaths of children, deaths of loved ones. Gods and hope of an afterlife were created in an attempt to explain the reality of the physical world and to bring comfort and solace, hopefully. We do things like weddings, namings and funerals. You probably remember the episode some years ago of Coronation Street of Hayley and what was her husband's name? Can't remember for the minute, but it doesn't matter. So let's just go to the next slide here. Whiz on a bit. And so in cases of terminal illness, humanists support the right to assisted dying. So just imagine you're dying of an illness which is actually going to drown you, and there's no way you're choking on your own mucus, your own liquids. So if there was definitely no way out for you, you might decide that you didn't wish to go that far. So humanists and people who are thinking, not only humanists obviously, support that. So abortion, humanists fully supports a woman's right to choose, and if you look at the figures there, I think that's for, 2020, it's about 210,000 cases, 88% of which were carried out under 10 weeks and only 1% over 20 weeks. Over 24 weeks is in exceptional circumstances. So, if the mother's in danger, people will make that decision on her behalf. So Richard Dawkins, you could be an atheist before 1859, but only after 1859 was it possible to be an intellectually satisfied atheist. And he's referring to Charles Darwin's publication of his famous book On the Origin of Species, in which he demonstrated clearly that God or a supernatural entity is not required for us humans to exist. There's just a simple diagram there with a few people there, and I think originally there's about 8 or 9 homos originally. Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Homo neanderthalensis, and us, of course. And we've since found in recent years that there are people in the world, quite a few people in the world, with up to 3 or 4% of Homo neanderthals DNA, which means we mated. So there's an interesting thing for you to consider. Okay, our closest living relative are the chimpanzees and the bonobos, and I'm sure some of you will recognise Richard Dawkins in the picture. No, he's not the one on the top right, and Alice Roberts there with the chimpanzee there. Just to give you an example of gods, Hebrew tribes had one god, Adam and Eve, which produced Adam and Eve. The Aborigines had many gods, resulting in the dream time where they wander about, in the intense heat, and create a scenario for themselves where their brains become dreamlike. I rather like the Hopi tribe goddess, a spider woman goddess. So spider woman. So Norse myths have many gods and a cow. Incidentally, Slavic myths have forest spirit called Leshy. Chinese myths, half human, half snake, and the goddess Nuwa. So just an idea, just a brief idea of the gods available. There are actually, I believe, about 3,000 gods available for people to worship these days. So the mere fact there's so many of them indicates that perhaps at least they're all wrong. In the 21st century, we need to tell the truth, which is true, I think. So this is Caroline Porso, Planetary Science. All the atoms of our bodies will be blown into space in the disintegration of the solar system to live on forever as mass or energy. And that's what we should be teaching our children, not fairy stories about angels or seeing grandma in heaven. So when you have a small child and their grandparents died, there is a natural reaction to soothe the pain by maybe telling them a Father Christmas type story. But maybe it's actually better in this 21st century world to actually tell them the truth. I think so. You can find ways. Earliest forms of writing, of course, was the Enuma Elish, written on mudstone about 3,000 years. And some of the stories in the Enuma Elish are also found in the Old Testament. And then about 2,750 BC, the story of Gilgamesh, who fought a giant, I believe was the story. 2,750, and then of course we have the stories via paintings of Hieronymus Bosch, Dutch painter, and here's his version of hell. So you have to stay out of hell. Part of the religious aspect is, of course, fear. So if you if you can frighten people, here you've got people being torn limb from limb and tortured and generally branded with hot irons and horrible things, so you don't go there, go to heaven, which is the most perfect place in the universe, although I don't think there's a signpost to get there, as far as I know. Okay, so our wills are not of our own making, but result from neural activity, knowledge, personal experience, and the laws of physics. What I mean by that is that if you consider that you or me, I don't control the cellular activity by telling it to take place. I don't control my kidneys or my liver or my heart. They all work autonomously. Similarly, there's no reason to suppose that the brain doesn't do the same. So there's some people up there, Free Will by Sam Harris, and Consciousness by Susan Blackmore. And I've been reading a book, I'll just go out of shot for a minute, by Professor Robert Sapolsky, called Determined. Okay, and it explains, in my view, clearly why we do not have free will. So I recommend you read that if you get an opportunity to do so. Religious people invariably, almost always, but mostly, we say they have free will, but of course we have the illusion of free will. Back in the day, it was a French philosopher called René Descartes proposed the brain had a supernatural ghost in the machine, but of course there's no evidence for this. So today, people like Sam Harris, who I've mentioned, Jeff Hawkins, Jerry Coyne, etc., 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 all say that the brain operates similarly to the rest of the body. It's an autonomous reaction. So, just to give you a little example, we know that the amygdala is the source of, it isn't just aggression. It's a source of fear. So, if you were out in the wild somewhere and you saw a snake, and your first sighting as an organism is through the visual effects, and then it goes through a whole series of layered instructions that eventually tells you that it's a rattlesnake. But the amygdala has an interesting thing. It's able to bypass that descending line of communication, and so the amygdala actually registers that it's a rattlesnake and dangerous to you before this is interesting, before you become aware that it is a rattlesnake. So you're already taking precautionary steps to avoid it. Now, there's a problem about that, in that that descending line of communication, or even though we're speaking about extremely small lengths of time, is that they're designed for the accuracy. In other words, the accuracy of the information. So you can see that in certain circumstances you might think the guy with the mobile phone in his hand has a gun, and you pull the trigger because your instinct is to survive. So yes, okay, so it's a small example there. There are lots of others. So the brain is in total darkness. Obviously, it's totally removed from the outside, and so it's entirely dependent on its information from the various senses, the hearing, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, and so on and so forth. And our ancient brain at the bottom, the reptilian brain, is extremely ancient, but our neocortex, and in particular the prefrontal cortex here, which is the area of the brain that provides delayed gratification. So obviously we might think of sex, obviously, not yet, but there are other areas where delaying is to make the right decisions. So the prefrontal cortex, which incidentally doesn't mature till your mid-20s. And if you think about young boys, for example, if they're 12, 13, 14, they're utterly scatty at times, but it's because nature has a way of allowing them to experiment with things and issues. And unfortunately, of course, obviously, young boys have a higher accident rate per se, as compared with young girls. So it's that maturation of that prefrontal cortex which actually allows us to hold fire and to think and to try and act in the best way for the organism to which the brain belongs. So you've probably heard about the necker cube. I'm sure you have. You've the smaller version. If you stare at that for a few seconds, you'll discover that this 2D representation of a 3D cube, it flips, and it's because the brain can't quite make up its mind. There's a little joke there. It's trying to find out what is the best way to perceive the cube. We are our brains. So Susan and Jim and Matthew and you, Roger, we and David, of course, we are our brains. Okay, couple of questions. So this is just to, for the sixth formers. I'll share this with you anyway, just for the fun, everybody. Shout out your answer in a minute. So a mobile phone and a case cost £110 in total. The phone costs £100 more than the case. How much does the case cost? Does anybody want to shout out?
Fiver.
Well done. It takes 8 printers, 8 minutes to print 8 brochures. How long would it take 24 printers to print 24 brochures? Interesting. Okay. That's right. You don't have to answer, incidentally, by the way. These were just for the sixth formers. So we're on to conspiracy now and theories and fake news. And of course, one of the wonderful things about the internet and social media is that you can have information instantly. So you could be typing an essay, 3,000 word essay, which your teacher has asked you to do, and you don't have access to a particular piece of information. In my day, a long time ago, we go, down to the bus stop, queue for the bus, get on the bus, go into town, get to the library, go to excuse me, have you got a book on? Yes, I think we've got, there's a card system, in the old days, card system. Oh, yes, we've got 2 of those, good. One of them's damaged and one of them's out. It'll be in next week. So you have to go back on the bus and wait a week, more or less. But here, you're typing the essay and you think, I need something on cosmology or whatever, and you can just add a little box. There's the information, and straight in. So I suspect that brains are going to become tuned in. I won't say evolved yet. It's probably I'm too strong a word. That we're going to be able to find out what's true by, I think in certain instances, we can right-click things these days and find out where that information came from. So, Democrat presidential candidate Hillary Clinton ran a paedophile ring from a Washington pizza shop. Now you go, nobody's going to believe it, but people did. And there was one chap who, being the hero, rushed into the pizza shop with a rifle to rescue the children. Fortunately, nobody was injured, which is good. And of course, then found that there was no cellar where the children were meant to have been kept in the first place. And you go, well, you know, so that person's brain was no more or less capable of learning and understanding than ours was. But he'd had the wrong information, and he believed the wrong information. So Donald Trump claimed climate change was a Chinese hoax. Yoko Ono said, I had an affair with Hillary Clinton in the 70s. Trump to ban all TV shows which promote gay activity. A woman, the last two really creased me out, I've got to be honest with you, sues Samsung for $2 million after her cell phone gets stuck in her vagina. So you just have this idea of, I don't know, maybe several thousand women in the world somewhere says, darling, I've found a way to make us a lot of money. And then my all-time favourite is the lottery winner arrested for dumping $200,000 worth of manure on an ex-boss's lawn. Now, I don't know what the going rate for manure is, but I'd like to say, imagine at least that $200,000, it's got to be a small mountain. I'd like to have seen it, you know, if it happened, but you know, clearly it's just part of the airwaves of theories and fake news. QAnon, I'm sure you're reasonably familiar with, claimed President Trump was combating a cabal of Satan worshipping pedophiles embedded in American deep state. Well, you know, okay. So, pandemic, more conspiracies, QAnon, 5G, the New World Order, and other viral ideas argued against it. You know, it was just for people like Bill Gates and Merkel of Germany then, as she was, or Russia has been accused by the US of spreading conspiracy theories that coronavirus is a biological weapon created by the sea, and so on and so forth. So in this modern 21st century world of ours, we need to be aware of such, and I'm sure that everybody here this evening is indeed aware of it. So we struggle to find the truth. So it's your story, it's my story, and it's the truth. Sometimes those pointers go in the same direction, and other times they don't. Depends who you're talking about, what your own background information. But of course, there is one very important story, of course. Here's another cow. Blossom was her name back in the day. And you're all going to put your hand up, aren't you, now, and tell me the story about Blossom. Oh, I'm quite shocked with this audience because you all seem very, very well informed. And of course, Blossom was the name of the cow that Edward Jenner, who, you know, if you wanted to say, created vaccines. So he scraped this little boy's arm, and after a period of weeks, he'd not got, let's just get there, cowpox. So dairy maids that did have the cowpox did not catch smallpox. Jenner reasoned that the two were linked. So by injecting the little boy with cowpox, and you know, if you just think about, you know, on today's standards, you know, the doctor would have been hauled up, be for the medical council, obviously, you know, for obviously taking a risk, but okay. So 1976 May, he inoculated 8-year-old James with cowpox, and July inoculated with smallpox. Think about that for a moment. And the boy did not contract smallpox. So Jenna and Blossom the cow, isn't she lovely? So of course vac means cow in Latin. I'm sure you all knew that. And so Jenna honoured Blossom by calling it vaccination. Aren't they cute? Seriously, they're just so cute. How could you eat those animals? Okay, no comment. So smallpox is at least 10,000 years old, and there's a whole range of examples there, which I won't bore you with. Back in the day, if you had a highly infectious disease, obviously one way is to exclude you from the rest of the population. So down in London, they built barges for people who had highly infectious diseases and put them on. I suspect, you haven't researched this, but I suspect that the buildings on there were only for people who had money and influence, and in order to maybe try and recover. So in 1967, there's a bit about science coming in now, the WHO, the World Health Organization, began vaccinating the world against smallpox, which was a huge task when you think about it. And in a 1980 statement, what's that? The world and all its people have won freedom from your smallpox, which was the most devastating disease sweeping in epidemic form through many countries since earliest times, leaving death, blindness, and disfigurement in its wake. Now, before vaccinations, it was estimated there were 15 million infections per year, and 1/3 of those died. After 1980, no infections, unbelievably, and no deaths. And that's because, of course, they were dealing with reality. And those of us who've been watching the what's the word? It's not the COVID inquiry will know of the differences of opinions between some politicians and the scientists. So it's not that scientists are always right. They're not always right. They find new information, obviously, but broadly speaking, we need to follow the path of reality to make good decisions for ourselves. Similarly with diphtheria, so England and Wales, so I'm not quite sure the dates there. Diphtheria was around 50,000 infections per year, and after vaccination was just one recorded. Measles, of course, is interesting, because it's starting to re-emerge. So there's about 450, 460 infections per year, and after vaccinations that was down to 130. So people who argue that vaccinations are dangerous and the work of the devil, or the left-wingers or whoever, no. So social justice in the old days, in the old cruel, bitter, nasty days. So you had, slavery and emancipation. You had sacrifice, ritual death. Women had no vote at all, in America. You had these terrible pictures here, the foot binding, and you had people being burned at the stake. And President Obama remarked that, religious freedom doesn't mean that you can force others to live by your own beliefs. Well, of course, that's absolutely true. So if you're a free thinker or a humanist or an atheist, then you're prepared to let people have their own thoughts, obviously. But it's worth saying that whilst one can respect other people with different views, the important thing is not to necessarily respect the ideas which they support. So, if you think about, slavery was endorsed by the Christian religion early on, and then things changed. So here we go. Okay, so we're nearly there. Just to give you an idea, so the English diarist Samuel Pepys, Saturday the 13th, October 1606, he said this was perfectly normal behaviour. Okay. To my lords in the Charing, in the morning, it was a mate of his, But he not being up, I went to Charing Cross to see Major General Harrison being hanged, drawn and quartered. He was cut down and his head and his heart were shown to the crowd, at which there were great shouts of joy. Now, it's not that the people shouting for joy, those brains were any less able than ours are, because it was only 300 or 400 years ago, so brains would have evolved significantly. It's just that they were brought up to believe that they could instill the kind of thinking which made that kind of cruelty the normal. There's a lovely story of one of the French Louis. He was attacked by somebody who wasn't very well with a penknife, and it's a penknife, and the penknife went through the clothing, but it scratched His Majesty. And after lots of toing and throwing, they brought this poor individual out and tied him to a bench, crushed his feet, cut off his genitals, and poured boiling oil into where they existed, and then got 4 cows, bullocks to tear him apart. But his limbs, sinews were so strong that the executioner had to hack bits so they could pull him apart. And the story is that his still breathing torso was then tossed onto the fire. So it's a bit excessive, really. In this modern day and age, we would say, well, the guy obviously was ill. We don't say things like little Jimmy in the classroom is slow and stupid. He's dyslexic. So modern thinking, modern information leads us to make better decisions. Okay, nearly there, folks. So this was for the students, really. So I'm sure most of you are aware of this, that all the chemical elements of the periodic table of which we're made are actually manufactured within dying stars in a process called nucleosynthesis. And of course, what this means is we're all made of stardust, or if you prefer the darker version, we're all made of nuclear waste. Yes. So I think we're coming to the close then. So knowledge, rational thinking may not provide social justice. We are still having arguments, all over the world, and if you think about Russia and Ukraine and Hamas and Israel, what we have there literally is we have 2 groups of people in the same species, Homo sapiens, vying for power and religious superiority, certainly with regard to Israel and Hamas. So at the chemical, so we got cancer places these days. Just down the road is the famous, Christie's Hospital, where they have all sorts of things, including the most wonderful PET scan, and people think where I take the cat of the dog at Hampstead. No, it's not. We can artificially manufacture the opposite of an electron, which is a positron. And so using the positrons, we have created a positron emission tomography scan, which means we can slice through cancerous growths, and get tiny individual pictures for better diagnostic reasoning. So yes, so that's exciting. So knowledge, reality, thinking equals social justice. That's up to all of us, obviously, and particularly up to the sixth formers who aren't here this evening. So the next generation, it's up to you, folks. I think we've come to an end. Yes, we have. Thank you very much indeed. So I'll just have a quick break, and then we can have a bit of a Q&A, because I can see lots of hands up around here at the moment. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Yes, two things, but I'll do it one at a time for specific responses.
I'm so relieved.
To each.
Yes.
As the first thing, I mean, in a lot of it, well, humanists are keen on social justice, so are most religions, but I'm not so keen on it. I prefer it's undermined by social reality, which nobody's interested in. I mean, we have consultants going on strike. It's hardly just in a way for them to be earning £120,000 a year. So, and yet it comes from the same sort of idea, social justice. We're rich, India's poor, nobody's concerned. It's a social reality which matters, and that people wouldn't work unless they were paid considerably, and people need incentive. So I'll be provocative if I'm not so keen on it. Social justice, it's an idea that doesn't work. What does work is more the Adam Smith idea of self-interest, and people are motivated by that, and we can't escape that.
Okay. All right, so that's your point, is it? Mm-hmm. So I might give you an answer, and if anybody else wants. So I will give you my own example. I'm 77 last weekend, and when I was a young boy, my mother, we lived for the first 13 and a half years of my life when I was born in 1946 in a 3-bedroom, flat, accordion flats, in a house that was condemned before the war. Okay, that's the first thing to say to you, and that would no longer be allowed today. My mother, like so many people of that era, she watched the black and white movies. Nobody told her about smoking, and you could watch the actors sometimes on the screen in a haze of smoke. And when I was 9 years old, she smoked regularly. She's making my bed, and she spewed blood all over my bed and passed out. I was 9. I rushed next door in a state of terror. Managed to get the neighbours in. They rang the doctor, and the doctor told them, get this, to get some ice for my mother and let her suck the ice. Okay. Now it was just before 11 at night, so my neighbours, bless their heart, rushed out to the fish and chip shop to get ice. Now, under modern medicine, that doctor would have been reprimanded, maybe lost his job, I don't know. So social justice, Jeffrey, moves on, and we all want social justice, and there's nothing wrong with social justice. Money is an issue. Yes, of course, it's always an issue, but...
Well, I'll take your very example. You say that you lived in a house that would have been condemned for...
Was condemned before the war, yes, before the war.
That's by British standards. In India, people are still living in a lot worse, and there are probably thousands of millions in Africa and Asia who are living in a lot worse conditions, and that was condemned, but nobody cares much about that. And they say, well, that's inevitable or something. Social justice is people's own, the poor or the relatively poor, relative to a society, claiming to some of them wanting to be more well off. And it's not only the poor, as I said, consultants are up to that as well.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You can't say what that. Social justice is incredibly important. It's very difficult. We've got to get.
Give him the microphone.
I'm sorry, I disagree with what you said. Social justice is extremely important. It's very difficult to do, and we've got to get it right. Just because we don't always get it right doesn't mean you abandon it and say, oh, well, it's fate, that's the way the cookie crumbles. It's an unjust world, get used to it. I'm sorry, I think what you say is just morally...
Reprehensible? Sorry, I just thought I'd throw that word in.
It's a Jekyll and Hyde thing, because everybody wants to virtue signal
just
or
hide.
whatever, but ignoring the reality, and the reality which they're party of. If you say, how about a 50% pay cut so we can give some more money to the Indians and the Thais and even the Chinese who are very poor, you wouldn't get elected on that. You wouldn't be popular on that. Or as long as it's academic virtue signalling, that's okay.
But I've already explained that basic social justice has improved within the country for people who aren't wealthy, who are poor, and we need to keep that going.
Technology's got better. That's been the biggest mover in it.
Come on, Martin.
I just say that's one of them. Obviously, technology has improved, but whether that's a significant factor, I'm not sure. I just think we've become a more tolerant society than we were before the war. And people who have, and there's been a bigger distribution of wealth as well. I know there's still too many people at the top with too much money, but there's less now than there were before. The death duties and all sorts of things have meant that some of that money has trickled downwards. Thank goodness.
I think that rich people's money trickles downwards is a myth, but that's nothing to do with the question I wanted to ask you. I think you are a non-compatible determinist, and you don't believe in libertarian free will. How does that affect the way you live your everyday life?
Well, it doesn't really. I mean, I'm just a human animal, and I go to bed at night, and I sleep, and I go to the toilet, and I eat. However, it does. That knowledge, I think, comes out into the wider world. So, for example, Robert Sapolsky, in his book Determined, gives the example. He says and you may need to just check that I'm right here, that the prefrontal cortex is developed to make decision-making process, and that gets passed to the cortex, and then it gets eventually passed down to the muscles. Now, what he's discovered is that in prisons in America on death row, depending on which prison you go to, up to 75% of the people who are awaiting death have got damage or atrophied prefrontal cortexes. So in other words, you can react by accident. You can react because you've had an accident. You can react because your mother has fed chemicals and hormones into your fetal body in the third trimester, which is causing a atrophying of the prefrontal cortex. And just to add to that, we no longer say that little Jimmy is stupid or thick in the classroom. We now know that little Jimmy has dyslexia. We now know that old women who like cats and who were unable to cry, but who were tortured badly, but couldn't cry, and the non-crying was seen as evidence of their being witches. It's just absolute twaddle, because, of course, as some women get older, their lacrimal glands don't work anymore. So you can torture them to death and they don't cry. So knowledge helps us move on. Knowledge helps us to make better decisions for everybody.
What about the system of justice? Should that be influenced by the fact we don't have
yes, I mean that
libertarian free will?
That's a hugely complex issue. The more I always think, Simon, the more complexity, the more difficult it is to make good decisions. But here's my thinking on it so far, and I may change. So, supposing you've got somebody in a car driving along, they've never ever had an epileptic fit in their entire life, and they experience at the wheel, they experience a grand mal. They're uncontrolled, they're sweating all over the place, and they run into a bus stop, and they killed 2 children and seriously injure the mother. Now, because we need to find agency and we need to find responsibility, we say, did you not notice that your husband or your wife was acting strangely today? No. Were they on drugs? No, they weren't. Did they have any previous history? No, they didn't. Okay, so then people, they understand, and it's a terrible accident, and the 2 children are dead, but nobody seems to be responsible. And then you take the second case, somebody who has experienced epilepsy, has been told not to drive, and has been given drugs in order to control the epilepsy. Okay, what do you say to that person whose brain has told them to drive despite the medication and being told not to? Well, you could look at, and I'm not making excuses, but you could look at the side effects of some of the drugs which are being used to control the epilepsy. Sluggishness, slowness, sleepiness, weariness. So there would be in the brains, it would say, don't take the drugs. That is an excuse, but it's a reality that the you isn't the you. It's your brain running the show.
It always is the brain that's you, isn't it?
Yeah.
You are the brain. But nevertheless, I don't think you can absolve yourself of any responsibility by saying...
I haven't tried to.
Oh, well, okay.
I haven't tried to do that.
Okay. That if that bag of atoms did something terrible,
yes,
still that bag of atoms that is responsible for it. Whether
yes,
the brain could not do otherwise is another matter. But it's still that bag of atoms that committed the atrocity.
I think we distinguish between responsibility and moral responsibility.
Yes.
As two distinct things. I think people distinguish between moral responsibility and responsibility. If your computer does something crazy and destroys some of the hard disk, the computer is responsible, but it's not morally responsible. It's a robot made of metal, but we're just robots made of flesh.
Yes.
That's the only difference.
If there's some punishment to be involved, it's still that bag of atoms.
Okay, so why would you want to punish somebody? There are some very good reasons. Firstly, to remove them from society if they're still dangerous.
Yeah.
Secondly, as a deterrent to discourage them from doing it again and other people. And thirdly, you may want to try and improve them, to cure them, to rehabilitation, which can sometimes be compulsory. But there is a fourth reason people are punished, and that's retribution.
Yes.
They've done something bad, so we're jolly well going to make them suffer.
Quite right, yes.
And we're going to bomb them in... Sorry, that's a bad example.
No, it's right. It's
so
okay. It's okay.
It is the retribution that becomes particularly abhorrent when you realise that at the end of the day, none of us have any actual control. When I say us, none of us can actually control anything we do. It's all already programmed by the brain some seconds before you think you're making a conscious decision. Yeah. In the same way that if your laptop suddenly said, I'm going to print out this document, and then it printed it out, you wouldn't say, well, the laptop decided to do it. You'd say the laptop was programmed to print out the document, and then just before it printed it out, to say that it was going to do so. And that is exactly the same as our apparent conscious libertarian free will.
Martin, you need to chair. You need to look round the room. You're not looking round the room, old chap.
I'm not, no.
No, you're not. I know you're not.
Question, Wendy?
If I haven't lost the point, but about the retribution,
Yes.
I don't think that's an out of control thing. I think that's if you're angry, you can control it. You can still be angry but control it. You can learn from experience and decide not to just lash out if you have the opportunity.
All right. Well, let me give you an example of that, and it's so I could throw in 3 words, and I'll answer you with the fourth one. First one, paedophilia. Second one, Lucy Letby. Think about those for a minute. So some years ago, not all that long ago, Anders Breivik used to wear uniforms and parade in the front of the camera, take pictures of himself, and in the end went on a shooting spree, killing 168 people and injuring umpteen others, I'm sure. He caused death and mayhem on a huge scale. It was, what was the country? Was it Iceland or Finland? Norway. Okay, Norway. It was their worst incident ever. And the prosecuting counsel on the opening day went up to Anders Breivik and shook him by the hand and said, "We are going to prosecute you fairly." Now, he was sentenced to 21 years in jail, which can be extended, but he has his own room. He has television, computer. He has access to university courses, which apparently he's taken up. If in 21 years' time they consider him to be, I don't know, cured, for want of a better word, okay, then he can be released. But if not, now there were parents there who were just like, "Ugh," but most of the people who were survivors of that, and most of the people who had relatives, were actually rather proud that the courts took that action. I mean, wouldn't you want to punch that guy in the nose if it was your husband or wife? But so, yeah. You don't sound very well. Are you right there, Martin?
Yeah, okay. Jeffrey?
1 moment.
Hope that answered you a little bit.
Well, right. I'll start it. I'll start with the comment that all this brain and free will is overrated in consciousness terms, because most of what we do is unconscious. We breathe without thinking and deciding about it. We digest food. If we bleed, the process which stops bleeding is mainly unconscious.
Yes.
There's so much which it's happy. The majority of things in life happen without conscious. So other decisions are just instinctive and automatic. But to go to the point, I'm not so convinced that there isn't free will. I mean, for a start, at the start of a football or cricket match, you do a toss. So that's to eliminate a predetermination, to make it a matter of chance. Roulette wheels is to make it a matter of chance. So
no, it's not the same thing at all.
We try and introduce chance and so into the world rather than predetermination. So, and I'm as I say, I'm not fully convinced. We may live in two worlds. We may be predisposed to, in some ways, to things, but we're all thinking and trying to make decisions in every day, with most of what we do. And is it really true that it's a false notion? I'm not convinced that it is. And then when you talk about punishment, well, the deterrence does have an effect on people. It makes them, for their survival instinct or whatever, more inclined not to misbehave.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't speaking against deterrence, and I suspect Simon want to come in on that one, or do you want me to go for it, Simon?
Well, firstly, deterrence. In any system of organisation, deterrence work, they'd work on computer networks just as well. It doesn't mean that we have free will. The evidence is pretty strong that we probably don't have what we call libertarian free will. For example, if you make a decision to say, lift your left hand or your right hand, and you make the decision entirely of your own free will, and you can specify when you made that decision, okay? By studying the brain prior to making that decision, you can predict which hand they're going to raise 8 seconds before they make the decision, their conscious decision.
Yeah.
Their brain's made the decision beforehand, but delayed telling the conscious part of the brain, the part of the brain that can speak. And similarly, experiments asking somebody to either subtract two numbers or add them, you can predict which they're going to do about 6 or 7 seconds beforehand.
I don't drive, but supposing you're driving, at the last moment you see somebody, you swerve away. That can't be 8 seconds before. If you take a sudden swerving action to avoid an accident, that's it's under a second before very often, and certainly not 8 seconds before.
That's a reflex reaction.
Yes, it is.
It's not a determined thing.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, but when you say your brain will say, you can tell whether you're going to lift your right hand or left hand in advance. Well, it can't be true.
So the only one.
It's true. It's certainly true.
Oh, Peter.
Always, it can't be true much of the time.
I think this 8-second argument has a fallacy, and that is that although we think that we make the decision immediately prior to our action, we could actually have made the decision 8 seconds before, but we didn't know about it.
Yes, that's the point.
That is exactly right.
Yes, the brain's the the brain's made the decision.
No, well, yes, but that decision could actually be made by our free will,
Well,
Unconscious free will.
unconscious free will, whatever.
But when we're talking about free will, what we're talking about is libertarian free will. The feeling that we can consciously make a decision. I can decide whether to lift my hand or not. Not something that happened before.
Definitely what Geoffrey was saying. If you swear, what Geoffrey was saying, if you see a child in front of you in a car, you've only got milliseconds to act, haven't you?
yes.
Yeah. So,
Yes, it's a reflex action.
But, so a reflex action bypasses the subconscious or something, is it? I don't understand.
No, reflex allows
Well-
subconscious.
Well,
Unconscious free
the only way that we could have free will, the way Geoffrey's describing it, is, if you think about it logically, is that in the brain somewhere, sitting in the brain, is a little homunculus. And that most of the time, our brain operates as it ought to do. But sometimes, Geoffrey's argument seems to suggest to me that that little homunculus decides to come in, play and operate and offer free will. Now there's nothing in the brain, Geoffrey, and there's nothing in physics or chemistry which can support that idea.
Once you've broken determinism in one way and created other possibilities, you really destroyed the whole the determinist nexus, because it relies on everything being determinist. Because if you throw in some random events, that just upsets the whole determinist scenario. So that's another reason for not being very convinced that everything is preordained.
This argument about predetermination assumes that the laws of physics aren't judged by quantum mechanics. Now, if you take, for example, the mutations of DNA, and they seem to be pretty random. Obviously they are caused by something, but as to which base is transformed in a particular stretch of DNA or not, it does depend on its chemical environment, and that chemical environment at the very elementary level depends on quantum mechanics, and so predetermination and quantum mechanics are not compatible.
Okay, so determinism without quantum mechanics is fairly straightforward. It's a determined system since the Big Bang. If you add in quantum mechanics, it remains predictable. It remains determined, but it's not necessarily predictable. And we're talking about here a true randomicity. You talked earlier about tossing a coin being random. It's not. It's just very difficult to predict. It's not random. There are virtually, I think there is only one truly random event, and that's the quantum superimposition random events.
Anyone else? Wendy.
Don't forget Matthew, he wants to ask a question as well.
So, if it takes 8 seconds to for a decision to come through, then isn't that decision that originates in your brain subconsciously? Doesn't that come from your subconscious? Yes. And your subconscious has developed because of things you've done and the way you think and who you are.
Yes.
So doesn't that mean that it's your will?
No.
That is because it's made subconsciously, but it takes 8 seconds to come into action or something.
Well, take the case of the computer. Okay? The computer was programmed to say, I'm going to print out this document and then print it. It's all there. So is the computer conscious? Does the computer have free will? Because it was merely programmed, it's part of its circuitry that it was going to do it. In the same way, this part of our circuitry.
But it's a personal decision. It's computer's programmed to do certain things. It doesn't make choices.
Yeah.
But we might have made choices previously about things.
So what you're really talking about is learning previously by experience. So I'm sure nobody in this room would even consider the idea of playing blind man's buff across a busy motorway, because we have the ability, I'm not being facetious, we have the ability to go, that could be very, very nasty and very, very dangerous, okay. But if we saw our 3-year-old grandson walking down the side of the motorway, or we saw our pet dog walking down the motorway, it would depend upon the maturation and the feedback of the brain's concern. Would the young child understand that if it was to run out, no, it probably wouldn't. Similarly, the dog.
Choosing what you're having for dinner or something.
What about it?
Or some other, I don't know, some other decisions that you might take.
Well, supposing you've got, I don't know, no, it's good. Good question. Supposing you've got ice creams. How about ice creams? So you've got 30 here, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And you can go, I'm going to have chocolate. Okay. So the brain has already decided that you're going to have chocolate. Can you cheat the brain? No, you can't. You could go, I'm going to go chocolate. Strawberry. All right. But the brain's already decided that you're going to choose strawberry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. I suppose I have this issue where I think that, to me, the idea of everything sort of being determined by whatever it is that's unknown, that sort of animates the physical world, because it's difficult to talk about what causes the physical world. Because I know there are sort of physicists who say maybe doesn't make sense to talk about a cause for that. We don't know. It's just a description. It's just as it is. And I've raised this sort of thing before, but to me, I'm going to try and understand that determined point of view, because if it's sort of the forces of physics that are moving things around to make things happen, then it would seem that when I'm telling you that I'm having experiences, it's not really because I'm having experiences. It's because the physics made me say that. And that to me seems incoherent. And I'd love to hear something against that from anyone or from yourself.
So ask the question again.
Well, it's when I say that I'm having experiences.
An experience.
But like right
Pick
now.
something.
I'm having an experience right now. It's great.
Okay.
But it would seem to me that if what I'm saying is sort of accounted for entirely by physical laws, because I do get where you're coming from with that, and I do software development, so sort of, I'm sort of familiar with these deterministic systems. It would seem that I'm only telling you that I'm having experiences because the laws of physics made my atoms move in a particular way. Blah, the sound comes out. And if that's covering the action, if that's explaining why I'm saying that, there's not really a need to think that there's an experience of experience, moving and puppeting my brain at all. It seems that the idea that we have experiences as opposed to we just claim to, do you see what I'm getting at? There's an incoherence there for me.
Yes, there is, and there's an incoherence there for me as well.
Well, it's something I'm really, trying to struggle with, and
so maybe I can help answer you. Maybe you can ask that question of yourself. So if you believe there's free will, which I think that's what you're suggesting.
Some sort. Okay, I mean, I know that there are problems with libertarian free will.
So how does the free will work then? How does it exist? How could you prove free will if it existed? Would you be able to do that?
I think if you accept the fact that I'm having experiences, I think you're sort of saying that there is like a mysterious something, like as if we were going to play algebra, right?
I'm not saying there's a mysterious something at all.
Well,
you are.
Okay, well, I mean, when you say that you're having experiences, for example,
yeah,
what's going on there? Are the laws of physics making you say that? Because if that's what's going on, it doesn't seem like we need to think that you're actually having experiences. Because the actions that made us think that that was the case have now been explained away in another form.
It is very weird. I agree. In fact...
Can I just...
Hang on, Martin, hang on.
Oh, okay, you go first.
Sorry, thank you.
Sorry, I'm talking. No, I agree entirely. I have great sympathy with you because... from day to day, as we both said, from day to day, we just believe with a delusion. It may be a delusion, but it's a delusion worth living with. But I think, like quantum mechanics, which is obviously nonsense, it is true. I mean, light cannot be both particle and a wave, and yet it is. Superimposition is totally bizarre, but it is. Quantum entanglement, nonsense. I mean, but it's true. And you just have to accept it. And I think it's something we have to accept. I don't think it affects very much of what we do, apart from judicial retribution, not personal retribution.
And well-being and health.
I'm just going to introduce a simple analogy, a firework. It's just a chemical thing that works according to chemistry and physics. If you once it's lit, the blue touch paper lights and sets off a firework. It couldn't do anything other than do that. So how is that different to the human body on a bigger scale? Once it's set in motion, the touch paper's lit, how could it react in a different way? The laws of physics would have to be suspended for free will to work, in my opinion.
Yes.
Yeah, there are lots of borderline. There are a lot of borderline decisions. I mean, in every day in my business life, if I'm looking to buy or sell a property, it's kind of be a borderline decision. And one time I might say yes, one time I might say no. With the same body. I mean,
but you'd have learned from previous experiences.
No, you never fully learn from previous experience.
No.
And
your brain would have learned something from previous experience, and it would have helped you to make a decision. And last week it might have been yes, this week it was no.
No, it's not.
What do you mean no?
No, I mean no. I mean, previous experience is never exactly similar, and anyhow it can be interpreted. So you learn in the more obvious things, perhaps from previous experience, but you certainly don't learn everything, and it doesn't eliminate.
No. Of course you don't.
Let's say contradiction or difficult decision, because it can still go either way. I mean, you're looking to the future. And we're not in the Indian cycle. The future does not resemble entirely the past. I mean, we're going through an economic problem such as we haven't had for a very long time. Can that be foreseen? Not really. COVID couldn't be foreseen, and the problems that caused. The war between Russia and Ukraine, which caused a lot of the economic problems weren't.
Well, I've been watching the inquiry lately. I don't know if anybody else has. Oh dear. The COVID inquiry is just
Well,
thank you.
They could have been foreseen. They did know that we would have pandemics. You can always say
Yeah,
there will be war.
a
There'll
different
never be a
one.
time when there isn't war.
Can I just give that microphone back to you in just a moment?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
You're next.
Well, I don't think I can.
Oh, okay. There we go.
you're keeping fit tonight, anyway, Matthew. Very flexible.
I have read about the study. I've read Sam Harris, not the book that you showed us on the slide, but I read about the study about free will and how decisions can be measured in the brain before we're consciously aware of them. And I also read about a different study where some people have a certain condition with their brain, the way the left and the right is linked, and it can be deactivated, and things can be shown to the right part of the brain, and an instruction to given to the left side, and one side of the brain isn't consciously aware that the other side has done that, and both of those studies are carried out by people vastly more intelligent than me, and I completely accept the results. But it doesn't make it any easier to accept as a person. It's extremely difficult to accept that there are various processes going on in the brain instead of one unified self, and also that things are happening before I think I've made a decision. It is almost impossible to accept.
I always
and
like light
comprehend,
bulb moments.
even though I accept that it's true. To fully accept it as a person, it's extremely
I like
difficult.
light bulb moments. You know, there's a problem you're in your life, or you're designing I don't know, something or other, and you're puzzling over it, and it takes you and you're sleeping, and an hour could go by, a day, a week, a month, and then boom, you go, oh, of course. And that's because your brain's been working on that problem subconsciously, and you've got no idea that your brain's been working on it while you're asleep. You know, you wake up the next morning and I have an answer.
Isn't your brain working on it in a particular way that's unique to you then?
Well, yes, probably. I'd have thought so.
Something I haven't got here, really.
But isn't it going to work on the previous experiences of Wendy and David and Matthew, that our brains will work and acquire knowledge and enable us to make decisions about things from previous experiences?
Quirky decisions as well.
Well, what's a quirky decision?
That aren't essential for survival or
self-interest. Yeah.
Decisions.
I'm going to wear this red dress tonight because, God, I look gorgeous in it.
Well, that could be quite self-interest. There could be a bit of self-interest there.
Yeah.
But frivolous things, for instance. You know.
Yes.
Wearing a red dress is not frivolous.
No, it could be strongly motivated.
I think we've got one more question, then I think we need to wrap up. It's 20 past 9 now.
It's this guy here for 2 questions, Martin.
2 questions.
Yeah.
First of all, I should apologize for my English, but I try my best to transfer my question to you. I have a question, Martin. I think our universe is nothing beside information. Okay. And if it's just information, just imagine you have access and you have power to calculate all this information and all factors that are involved. Okay. Would it enable you to determine, to predict, predict my behavior in next 10 minutes?
Well, even if, and you might like to come in.
If you are a supercomputer.
Even if, let me think how I want to answer that.
You have all information and all power to calculate.
So the first thing to say to you is that it would be impossible for any human being to have all the information available to it within the universe. That's just that. However, yes, we could predict all sorts of things if we knew the state of your prefrontal cortex at the moment. If we knew the state of
all information
if we knew the
universe, observable
universe.
No.
I'm only giving it a small amount, and we can make statistical predictions. Okay, it would depend also on the state of your mother during pregnancy. It would depend upon how you were parented. It would depend upon the environment which you were brought up in. I hate to say this, if you were brought up in an environment of I don't know, poor parenting, bad parenting, cruel parenting, if you were brought up in a region of guns and drugs, statistically, you are going to go down some of that road at least. So we would be able to predict with reasonable statistics that you would have a certain set of behavioural patterns. We don't need to have all the knowledge in the universe to be able to do that.
But if you have all the knowledge, information and power to calculate it as it is there, would it be able to predict every event in this universe?
How would I know? That's the answer. How would I know? Simon.
It's a valid question.
I think it's
Are we extending questions?
Well, I think we've got to wrap up very soon now.
Okay.
Why?
It's a classic question because if you knew every single piece of information that might have any influence on what I do next, you'd be able to predict it with one proviso, and that is quantum uncertainty.
Yes.
Which does mean the world is still determined, but not always perfectly predictable. But quantum events tend to occur at atomic or subatomic level. They will affect large molecules. There's a quartz crystal being able to have superimposition. It's about 10 to the 17 atoms or something. It's quite a big crystal. But nobody's been able to get quantum events anything that might affect biological systems.
The last question now, Martin.
Peter?
Yeah. Sorry. No, sorry, Peter.
Just there is the feather, the butterfly effect, and a single quantum event can actually have enormous ramifications. However, having said that, if I can just sort of sum up how I feel, and that is that we may or may not have free will of whatever you call it, but I find the illusion of free will is very important for society. I'm a utilitarian. If something works, don't knock it. And it does seem that the illusion of free will does help us in a society to be reasonably civilized. And although it's fine for us in this esoteric environment to argue whether it's predestined or whether it's total free will or not, the illusion is there for all of us, and if we follow that illusion, then in general we do make the right decisions about our behaviour. Except that religions, particularly the Abrahamic religions, tell all their followers that they have free will. Okay, and it's the very basis of religious thinking. And if we humans are faulty and we go against the free will that God has graciously given us, okay, then we're no. You would still, I think, have to add in that little homunculus which I spoke about earlier on, and I don't see how you can do that.
From a pragmatic point of view, I agree with Peter, but I think it's wrong, but I think it's a workable way of living.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, no, it was good. It was good. So next question from somebody or comment or as gentleman over there.
One of the things you touched on is something I've been concerned about for quite a while now, which is though human beings have made a lot of progress, it seems to me that one of the things that concerns me is that human beings essentially evolved in a very different environment, and I am concerned about how well adapted human beings are to the modern world and the problems that we have to face. And I give you an example which reminded me of that in your talk, which is that the first vaccines were used in 1796, but we still have now in the 2020s a massive fear of vaccines. And one of the things that actually happened as a result, according to the NHS figures, as a result of the COVID vaccine, in some social groups, the flu vaccination went down. So basically, middle-class educated people, their uptake of the flu vaccine went up as a result of the COVID vaccine and dual vaccination. But lower socioeconomic groups, less educated people, their uptake of the COVID vaccine, the flu vaccine went down compared with pre-COVID. And I just think that kind of thing concerns me when we're talking about trying to put together a programme for stopping climate change and not blowing ourselves up and other little luxuries like that.
You're right, of course, but I would say that we're on the path. It isn't, we can. Let me just try and think so we can become amazingly cruel, amazingly violent, and that goes back to the amygdala and fear and so on and so forth. But simultaneously, within that same organism, we are without doubt the most empathic, altruistic, kindly, sharing primate on the planet. The mere fact that we can live in a city together of 8-10 million people. Now, our nearest relatives are chimpanzees. When they get to about 90 or 100, the young males start having little squabbles and they go off to form their own tribes, as it were. Okay, but here we are, and I, generally speaking, and I'm not being facetious here. I genuinely don't. When I go to my supermarket to buy my weekly shop, I don't think, oh God, it's just fellow humans. I go in and I get my shopping, and the whole process of that, growing the crops and cultivating and bringing them to the supermarket. Whilst supermarkets per se, we may have issues with them, the reality is that the regular food for us all means we're tending to live longer, and they free people up. There are people who enjoy farming. There are people who enjoy building houses. I don't do any of those things. So I have the freedom to do other things, and I'm just grateful for doctors and nurses and hospitals and NHS services and farms and all the rest. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. But we are still on a path. Yes. I hope that's answered your. Yeah.
It has. Yes. Thank you.
Good. Have you any more comments or
no,
Q&As?
Thanks. No.
Absolutely none whatsoever. Oh.
Just an observation,
Go on.
which I only was pointed out to me quite recently, which is you were talking about all the nasty punishments that they used to have in the 1600s.
Yeah.
In the Middle Ages.
Yes.
But I hadn't really thought about it like this. But one of the things that I saw recently pointed out that one of the reasons the state had to do that was it actually couldn't do anything else. It didn't have other options because the prison system, as we now understand it, that was developed in the 19th century, is really expensive. And the state in medieval times and early modern times simply couldn't have afforded a large-scale prison system. Because and the society couldn't. Therefore, one of the reasons why they carried out what appeared to be barbaric and cruel punishments was that, in actual fact, it was actually one of the, and they didn't catch a very high percentage of people. So when they did catch them, they basically the lower your conviction rate, the more the higher your penalty in order to deter people. But also they didn't have imprisoning people for a long period of time was simply not an option.
Yes, except there's one thing between having executions, which obviously I'm sure most of the people in this room are opposed to, but you see, we are a dual animal, and let me think how to explain it. So there is a huge audience for things like revenge movies, okay, where the most horrible, awful people eventually meet up with justice at the end, and we're slightly pleased about this, or we're delighted, or revenge movies don't necessarily have to be violent. So you probably watched a film, I don't know, in the past year or two called Hidden Figures. And it's the story of 4 black women in the 60s who were absolute geniuses at mathematics and were employed by NASA, and they worked on various space projects. And in the story, because they were black and there was still segregation in those times, one of the women got put into an environment of all males where she was doing the maths. She was the only black person there. But when she wanted to go to the toilet, she had to run half a mile to the nearest coloured person's toilets. And one day her boss came out of his office and said, "When I look around, you're off to know what's going," and she lost it. And the most wonderful scene in the film of the story is the Kevin Costner character, who's playing her boss, has taken a sledgehammer to the coloured only toilets and is smashing it down. Okay, so there's a revenge there that she's got, and I'm going, and I'm in tears at that point. So we are, it's true, a species which can be very, very cruel and violent, but that's because if you're brought up in an environment, think about ISIS, think about Hamas, or any other cruel religion that's been in the past. They're brought up in the environment to believe that that's the way we'd handle it. I would argue, though, that the cruelty of the punishments in the old days were not because people couldn't understand that they were morally appalling, but because the leaders had to keep control of things. So, yes, you might be partially right about the prisons. Nonetheless, to chop people's limbs off and remove their genitals, that doesn't take a great deal of grasping that such an act is truly immoral. I think it's immoral, Yeah. Did you mention, I think somebody in the audience some while ago mentioned a fellow called Jeremy Leonard, because I've done quite a bit of this talk based upon Steven Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now. And there was some pushback. Since I remember, there's a chap called Jeremy Leonard, and somebody who I have a great deal of time for is George Monbiot. He's I think he's done sterling work, but they both attacked Pinker because they appear to be accusing him of supporting rampant capitalism, and that's not his take. His take is about that if you give people a good environment to live and survive and to work and to create, broadly speaking, human beings and human brains will respond to that. If you treat them badly and you give them poor food and a bad justice system, then they're not going to respond as well. And my point about the prefrontal maturation not finishing off between 25, 20 years is that that's still developing, and that's the area of the brain that delays gratification and makes decisions based upon thinking processes. So, the more education we provide for people throughout the world, and the more we can restrict the use of relying upon imaginary supernatural entities which don't exist, which apparently take away all your sins if you just go and pray, or some Hail Marys, or if you're lucky, go to heaven, 72 virgins. And of course the awful thing about the Israeli Hamas arguments at the moment is that Hamas, being ultra religious, or at least following it, they don't mind that their own people will be killed, because they will argue that they're actually sending them to heaven earlier than they'd have gone otherwise. So there's that way of overcoming what to us would be something which is morally repugnant. Thank you very much for the question. Any more?
I think the criticisms of Pinker that I read were based on some of his economic arguments, and basically some of the figures that he used were a bit difficult to justify in terms of percentage increases in wealth as opposed to absolute increases. And also he talked about he talks about economic growth. He says that there's no correlation between economic growth and improved health and well-being in the third world. He says you can't equate correlation with causation, but then he pretty much does. So that's the accusation. I've not read the book, and the counter argument is that, well, actually, it's the other way around, and that health corresponds more closely with increases in education, and therefore the better argument is that both economic growth and improvements in health are actually being caused by education, not the other way around. But the problem with discussing economic growth is that it's a battlefield, because there's no value neutral definition of economic growth, because gross domestic product. I mean, one of the examples that they cited was, an oil slick. An oil slick is good for gross domestic product, because people have to spend lots of money on clearing it up, and that's all economic activity. That increases GDP.
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
A lot of other things, such as environmental degradation, are not economically priced and are therefore not factored in.
No, that's true.
Voluntary work and higher education. And,
I mean, England was... We were fortunate, if that's the right word. It is the right word, I think, to live in a country astride millions of tons of coal, and we got that free, providing we provided the miners to go down there and dig the stuff. And I'm sure hundreds of miners would have died and got various diseases, coal diseases of the lungs. Nonetheless, looking back in history, although now we would, provide filtration systems, and also begin to move away from coal, because we know the damaging effects to the climate. We are where we are today in this country significantly through the work of the miners and the bad bosses, of course. So we are where we are. Energy, if we could, if we had an unlimited energy supply, and I'm guessing that's going to come at some point, through hydrogen, which is the most abundant element, in the universe. It's mostly hydrogen. So we wait and see, but we're just passing through. 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, nobody will remember me or you or you or you or you. We're just all gone. But here we are. We've made it. Yes, very exciting. I think.
I think it's one of the best arguments against religion is the short human lifespan. I think that it's either evidence that there is no God who cares, or that there is a God and he is manifestly hostile, if not mischievous. Because of the point that you make is you don't actually, by the time you're sort of adult and educated, the actual. Bear in mind we're talking about lifespans now in 2023.
70s, 80s, 90s is relatively
true, but it's still not that long in terms of one's proper engagement with the world as an adult. It's actually not that long, a period. And I think that's one of the reasons why religion has been so attractive, because of short human lifespans.
Oh yeah. So you imagine you're a Homo sapiens 50,000 years ago, and you're an individual who's experienced things like volcanic activities and tsunamis and skyburst and so on and so forth, and your child's lying dead before you. Now, if you're going to create an entity which says, there must be a sun god or a star god or a tsunami god or whatever, maybe there's a god, maybe there's somewhere I'm going to see my child again, and you'd hope for that, wouldn't you? You would hope for that, wouldn't you? I think, yeah.